Record high inflation continues to plague Americans, and with no clear plan from the White House, consumers remain concerned. Texas Congressman Kevin Brady blames the spiraling economy on President Biden's stimulus package for driving up prices and labor shortages.
He's also criticized the president over his Wall Street Journal op-ed released this week, outlining a plan to combat inflation. Joining us now is the Republican leader of the House and Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Brady. Welcome.
Thanks, Robbie, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. So, tell us, in your opinion, how Biden's policies are driving this terrible inflation we're all having to deal with.
Yeah, well, the good news is you don't have to take my word for it. The Congressional Budget Office just came out and confirmed that nearly $2 trillion stimulus package exactly at the wrong time, drove higher inflation, a worse worker crisis, more debt, and ultimately higher borrowing costs on families as well. So, policy decisions make a difference on families. We've seen this. My frustration has been that the White House and the Fed have been in denial about both inflation and the worker crisis for much of the past year and a half. And as a result, that's why families are just getting crushed with higher prices. That's why our small businesses, cannot, the prices for them is double digit, has been for half a year, cannot find the workers they need. They're really, many of them are worried they're not going to survive this inflation. And so what I see right now, the president one day has a plan on inflation, the next day admits there is no plan for inflation. But what I see under the Biden White House is we have a shrinking economy, shrinking paychecks, a shrinking workforce, and much higher borrowing costs. And that is, I think, as we head into a recession, I think that's bad news for a lot of Americans.
Congressman, one of the price points that Americans are complaining the most about are gas prices. And it's been pointed out that gas use hasn't returned to pre-2020 levels. So claims that the issue here is that consumption is too high, that there's too much money in the pocketbooks of American consumers, and that's what's driving inflation, don't seem to be really dispositive. It seems instead that when you look at the enormous the profits that are being earned hand over fist by the oil industry, that it really is a combination of gas, of price gouging and other things going on. There's been similarly concerns about price gouging in some of the big food monopoly industries, specifically meat. What do you think is the best way to address those kinds of roots of the inflationary crisis?
Yeah, in my view, they're not the roots. And I think President Biden and Democrats have been debunked repeatedly on claims of price gouging by oil companies and by others. Fact of the matter is, we had record production here in America pre-COVID and under President Trump that plunged dramatically. And under President Biden, you've seen really an attack on American-made energy, and those production levels aren't back up to what they should be. Certainly, too, we're having trouble without pipelines. We can't refine them here in America and get that energy, affordable energy, out to the regions that need them the most. That's why the Northeast and California, I think, see some of the highest prices here. And so I don't think the president can blame others. Certainly the American public sees it as his decision making. That's why I think about 70% of Americans right now feel like this economy is bad, and they are very pessimistic about the future, especially with fuel prices.
Well, to what do you attribute the $35 billion in oil company profits at the same time that Americans are paying so much at the pump?
Yeah, you probably want to look back a year earlier than this, when those same companies were losing $35 billion plus under President Biden, under the COVID pandemic. So, as the economy rebounded, obviously, profits rebounded too. But truth of the matter is, this president drove up those prices. The oil companies did not. They don't control that. As you know, it's set on a worldwide basis, and the president's, confirmed that as well. So I really think the president needs to stop blaming others for what many are calling Biden inflation, and come up with a plan.
And Congressman Brady, what are Republicans going to do? What is their affirmative agenda, assuming they do recapture a lot of political power, in the next election cycle or two? What is the Republicans' affirmative agenda to fix some of these problems?
Yeah, ours will be first unleash American-made energy, which this administration is declared war on. Secondly, stop doing what's made this inflation worse. So stop doing what President Biden keeps doing, which is he's still seeking more spending, major spending bills that will drive inflation higher. He wants higher taxes on Main Street businesses, will drive prices higher. And he is doing nothing to reconnect workers to their workforce. You'll see Republicans focused on the economy, on workers, on families, and reconnecting people to their jobs so we can get inflation under control.
Can you be more specific about how Republicans plan to reconnect people to their jobs? Because some might point to Joe Biden's choice to say, try to break up the monopoly power that is driving up prices in the meat industry by giving money, as he's done this week, to smaller local businesses that have really struggled to compete with big ag companies like Tyson, as exactly that kind of policy. What do Republicans have in mind instead?
Yeah, so that policy has nothing to do with getting the 2 million workers that are on the sideline under Joe Biden reconnected to work. In fact, many of the programs the president continues to push actually incentivizes people to stay home rather than reconnect to work. We need a real emphasis on the workforce in reconnecting workers. And by the way, they're not the elderly, the 55 and older. They've come back to the workplace. It's the 24 to 54-year-olds, the one really our economy depend upon. They're the ones staying out of the workforce. You know, meat packing has got nothing to do with that problem. We just can't get the president to even acknowledge, sort of like the border and the crime crisis. We just can't seem to get him to acknowledge there's a worker crisis here.
Well, one concern many workers have articulated is that the high cost of childcare, sometimes averaging around $2,000 a month, is higher than the average minimum wage salary. And with the minimum wage having been raised for the longest period of time in American history since 2009, a lot of people are making the really difficult decision about whether to pay someone else to look after their children so that they can go and earn less than what they're paying their child caregiver. Is there any solution coming out of the Republican Party to address the child care crisis in this country, in addition to the housing crisis and some other things that are really impacting people's ability to stay afloat right now?
Yes, and as you know, under President Biden, child care costs have soared, and under his Build Back Better plan, for an average family, it would increase almost $28,000 a year. To your point, I think would discourage more families from returning and reconnecting to work. The Republicans have a pro-family, pro-worker agenda that actually has free market solutions to encourage, lower costs, better quality child care, but one that's driven by our businesses and our workers, not by Washington. We think there's a way to lower those costs and stabilize them without new government entitlement programs that drive those prices up.
Congressman, can you explain specifically the accusation that child care costs have risen under Biden as a consequence of some policy? Because a lot of parents across the aisle were very happy to receive the child tax credit. It was a very popular program that helped a lot of people pay for child care costs in the early days of the pandemic. What is the Republicans' response specifically, not just kind of generalizing and saying that we have a family-focused program? What specifically are you going to do that helps families deal with the fact that for decades now, child care costs have been very high regardless of who's in office?
So ask any American family, have child care costs gone up under President Biden? And they will assure you they have significantly. And secondly, the child tax credit for the first time under President Biden is no longer connected to work. So it actually discouraged Americans. And we heard from our local businesses how they were losing good workers because the child tax credit actually paid them more to stay home than to reconnect and stay on their jobs. So Republicans, as you know, created the child tax credit along with President Clinton. It was an encouragement, incentive for families to work and reconnect. Now it no longer is. It's one of the reasons I think we're still struggling with this worker crisis.
And Congressman, another issue that's so huge for families right now, obviously the baby formula shortage. And look, I understand if there was dangerous formula that was going to be on the market because of problems with this factory that needed to be dealt with. But is there any concern about the regulatory approach? Where I'm lobbing lots of criticism at the FDA these days, given various COVID matters. Is there going to be some kind of oversight of how this sort of thing can happen? And depriving lots of families of formula they really, really need. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it is a real issue in Texas. Our average, I think 50% of our supply is missing right now, worse than the national average. So you're exactly right. It is really getting desperate for some of our families. I think, in watching what the administration's tracked here, I think they've confirmed, the president or the administration didn't act very quickly on this. He says he wasn't alerted about this crisis for months. I think that delay was very costly here to address it. I know now the administration is trying to take actions to bring a formula in from overseas. I worry it's going to be awfully late to the problem. I think they have to take a fresh look at how they're addressing these key commodities, and if there's going to be a problem, how they act on it immediately. I think every administration would want, including this one, would want to know the problem immediately and respond immediately. It just didn't happen in this case.
Congressman, there has been a lot of conversation about the military spending in light of the war in Ukraine. We got news recently that there are, I believe, 4 long-distance rocket launchers that are being purchased for Ukraine at about $5 million a pop. There have been unprecedented defense budgets this year, and on and on and on. Are you concerned that that kind of military spending is having an inflationary effect, or is it only spending on American people, social support services, and the kinds of interventions that can help people at the pump or in the grocery stores that are perceived to be raising inflation?
I don't think the investments we're making in the military right now, especially to help Ukraine defeat Russia, adds to inflation. In fact, most of funding, the $40 billion, which, by the way, the rest of the world is really thanking America. I was just in Europe and at NATO for that aid to Ukraine. I wish the president wouldn't have taken so long to send these more medium distance rocket launchers to Ukraine. I think Russia had, unfortunately, a good week militarily that they shouldn't have. And so I do worry about that. But I think that we now know Putin's not stopping at Ukraine. These investments we're making, they aren't contributions here. They're investments in our own security. I think they're pretty smart investments from the American public.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Good to see you. Take care.
You too. Next on Rising, Paxlovid, the COVID-19 antiviral drug, was first pegged as a massive breakthrough. But now that the treatment is out there, reports of a COVID rebound are being documented, and we'll talk about that next.